I caught my ex-wife climbing over my fence at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, barefoot, sunburned, one leg already across the top rail of the cedar fence I built with my own 2 hands the summer we got married. Her name is Delaney. 3 years ago she was my wife. Then she signed the divorce papers in a parking lot without one word of explanation, got into a stranger's car, and let this whole town watch her drive out of my life. I'm Owen Marsh. I build things for a living. My father's name is on the sign over my shop, and for 3 years the only thing I've built is the reason I don't say her name out loud. But there she was, hanging on my fence in broad daylight like a thief, and when she saw me standing there with a hammer in my hand, she didn't run, she froze, and she said, "Please, let me stay at your place until morning." Not one night at a motel. Not one call to her father, the richest man in this county, whose money could have put her in a hotel suite by sundown. My place, my back room, until morning, and she wouldn't come down off that fence until I answered. But here's what stopped my heart cold. It wasn't the bare feet. It wasn't the shaking in her voice, or the fact that the woman who left me without a goodbye was now begging me for one single night under my roof. It was what I saw on the other side of that fence, lying in the grass behind her. A pair of little pink sneakers. So why was my ex-wife climbing my fence in the middle of the day, instead of knocking on my door? Why did a woman whose father owns half this town have nowhere to sleep but my back room, and whose child was lying asleep in my hedges? Stay with me, because what she told me that night didn't just explain the divorce. It rewrote every single thing I thought I knew about the day she left. Let me back up 11 minutes. It was the hottest Tuesday of the year, 91 degrees, the kind of heat that sits on your shoulders like a wet coat. I was up on a ladder in my own backyard, replacing a picket that had gone soft with rot, and the cicadas were screaming in the oaks, so loud you could feel it in your teeth. I'd built that fence in June of the year we married. Delaney handed me the boards one at a time. She had paint on her wrist, and she kept saying we were doing it wrong, and we were, and neither of us cared. Now I was pulling it apart, board by board. That's what I did on my days off. I fixed the parts of my life that had rotted, and I never once let myself think about why I'd started with that fence. Then I heard the wood groan, not the wind. Wood groans different when weight is on it. It's a sound I know the way a doctor knows a heartbeat. I turned around, and a woman was coming over my fence. She had one hand flat on the top rail and one leg swung across, and her hair was stuck to her neck in dark ropes, and her feet were bare and filthy and red across the tops from the sun. She looked like something the road had chewed and spit out. Then she lifted her head, and every bone in my body forgot its job. 3 years. 3 years of not saying her name. 3 years of turning the truck around when I saw her father's car outside the diner. 3 years of Dot Feeney next door, watching me get the mail like she was waiting for me to finally crack open. And here she was, straddling my fence in the middle of the afternoon like a kid caught stealing apples. Delaney. Her mouth moved before any sound came out. Then, Don't what? Don't say anything yet. Her voice cracked down the middle. If you say anything, I'm going to lose my nerve, and I only get one shot at this. I stood there with a hammer in my hand and sawdust on my forearms, and I could not make my brain accept what my eyes were showing it. Get down, I said. No. Delaney, get down off my fence. If I get down, you'll tell me to leave. She said it fast, all in one breath, the way you rip a bandage. If I'm standing on the ground, I'm just a woman in your yard, and you'll walk me to the gate, and you'll be polite about it, Owen, because you're always polite, and I will not survive being walked to that gate. So I'm staying right here until you hear me. The cicadas went on screaming, and I looked at her, really looked, and I started seeing things I didn't want to see. Her shorts were gray with dirt at the hem. Her tank top had a sweat line down the spine. There was a scratch on her calf, fresh, still beating. Her lips were split in the middle from being dry too long. This wasn't a woman who'd had a bad day. This was a woman who'd been outside for a long, long time. Please, she said, let me stay at your place until morning. And there it was. 7 words. The woman who walked out of my house without a single sentence of explanation, who let this whole town decide I was a man who couldn't hold his wife, who signed those papers in a Kroger parking lot with a stranger in a suit sitting in the passenger seat of a Buick. That woman was hanging off my fence in the daylight, asking to sleep in my house. Something hot came up through my chest. No, she flinched like I'd swung at her. Owen, no, you don't get to do this. My voice came out low and shaking, and I hated it. You don't get to disappear for 3 years and then climb over my fence like it's nothing. 3 years, Delaney. Not a call, not a letter, not one word about why. I know. You don't get to know. You don't get to stand up there and say, I know, like that covers it. It doesn't cover it. Then what are you doing here? And she said, very quietly, I got to your porch 3 times. I stopped. 3 times, she said. Today, I stood at your front door 3 times, and I couldn't lift my hand. So I came around the back, because I knew if I got up on this fence, there'd be no way to talk myself out of it. She laughed then. A wrecked, ugly little sound, with no laugh in it at all. That's what I've turned into. A woman who has to trap herself into asking for help. And that's when I saw them. Down in the grass on the other side of the fence, half in the shade of my hedge, a pair of pink sneakers, small ones, the kind with the little lights in the heel that blink when you run. Sitting neatly side by side, like somebody had taken them off on purpose and set them straight, because that's how they'd been taught. My whole body went cold in 91-degree heat. Delaney, I could barely get the word out. Whose shoes are those? She didn't answer. She looked down at the grass on her side of the fence, and her face did something I had never seen it do in 6 years of marriage. It broke. Please don't wake her, she whispered. She hasn't slept since Sunday. I dropped the hammer. I don't remember deciding to move. I was around that fence and through the side gate, and standing in my own hedge line, and there in the flattened grass, curled up on her side with her cheek on a folded jacket, was a little girl. 6 years old, maybe, brown hair stuck to her forehead, a red mark on her cheek from the zipper of the jacket. Both fists closed tight around a plastic dinosaur, with the paint worn off its back. She was asleep in my hedges, in the shade, because somebody had run out of places to put her. Something in me came apart right there, quietly, where nobody could see it. I've built houses. I've stood in the frame of a bedroom before there were walls on it and thought, somebody's kid is going to grow up in this room. I've spent my whole life making places for people to be safe inside of, and there was a child sleeping in the dirt outside my fence. I turned around. Delaney was still up on the rail, watching me watch her. Come down, I said. Owen, I'm getting the ladder. Come down. I dragged the ladder around and set the feet in the grass and held it steady, and she came down 1 rung at a time like every muscle in her hurt. When she got to the bottom, she stood there in front of me for the first time in 3 years, close enough that I could smell gas station soap and hot asphalt and old sweat. I did not touch her hand. I want you to understand that. Every part of me wanted to. And I didn't, because if I had, I'd have had nothing left to stand on. One night, I said. Her eyes came up. One night, I said again. And you tell me who that child is. She nodded, and her chin went, and she pressed her whole hand over her mouth to keep it in, and she nodded again. Then she went and knelt in my hedge and put her hand on that little girl's back and said, in the softest voice I have ever heard a human being use, Josie. Hey, Josie Bug, we got a bed. The girl's name was Josie. She woke up the way animals wake up in the woods, all at once, eyes open, completely still, checking. She looked at Delaney, then she looked at me, this big stranger with sawdust on his arms, and she didn't cry and she didn't smile. She just looked. Then she sat up, put her sneakers on herself, and pushed the little Velcro straps down flat with her thumb, twice each, like it mattered. She didn't say a word. Not one. Not walking through my gate. Not coming up my back steps. Not standing in my kitchen looking at the ceiling fan. Not one single word. My house is not a big house. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that smells like coffee no matter what I cook. A back room I use for storing lumber and avoiding my own thoughts. Delaney stopped just inside the door, and I watched her eyes go around the room, and I knew exactly what she was doing, because I'd have done the same. She was looking for what had changed. Nothing had. That's the part that killed me. Same table. Same chipped blue bowl on the counter. Same crack in the window frame over the sink that I kept saying I'd fix. Same house she'd walked out of. Just quieter. You never moved. she said. No. I thought you'd move. I thought a lot of things, too. That landed. She took it without arguing, which was new. The old Delaney would have come back swinging. This one just breathed out and set her bag down on my floor. One bag, a canvas duffel, gone soft at the corners from being carried too long. One bag. For 2 people. I made grilled cheese, because that's what was in the house. Butter in the pan, the bread going gold. The smell filling the kitchen the way it used to on Sunday nights when we were broke and happy and didn't know that was the same thing. Josie sat at my table with her feet swinging 6 inches off the floor. She set the dinosaur down beside her plate, facing the door. She ate that sandwich in 4 bites. 4. Like somebody might take it. I put a second one in the pan without saying anything, and I heard Delaney behind me make a sound like she'd been hit. While the girl ate, Delaney talked. Low, fast, keeping her voice under the sizzle of the pan so it wouldn't carry. Her name is Josie. She's 6. A breath. She's Shelby's. Shelby, Delaney's little sister. Loud laugh, terrible driver, used to call me brother-in-law like it was a joke we were both in on. How is Shelby? I asked. And Delaney went very still. She died, she said. 14 months ago. The pan hissed. The fan turned. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and quit. 14 months, I said. March before last. Nobody told me. I know. Delaney. Nobody told me. My hands had gone numb on the handle of the pan. I would have come. You know I would have come. I'd have driven through the night. I'd have... I know, she said. That's why nobody told you. And she wouldn't look at me when she said it, and I didn't understand that sentence yet, but it went into me like a splinter and stayed there. Here's what she told me at my own kitchen table while a 6-year-old ate her second grilled cheese. Her car died that morning in the Kroger lot, 11 blocks from my house. 11 blocks she walked in 91 degrees, carrying a duffel bag, with a child who wouldn't complain because she'd stopped complaining months ago. There's a women's shelter over in Bristow County. They take intake at 7 in the morning, not 6:30. Not by phone. 7, in person, and they will not hold a bed for anybody for any reason. She had 14 hours to get rid of. 14 hours, no money, no car, and a little girl who'd already slept 2 nights in the back seat of a Chevy in a church parking lot. Motel, I said. $41, she said. That's what's in my account. I checked at the gas station. Then your father. The words tasted like metal. Delaney, your father owns half the buildings on Main Street. He could put you in a hotel with a chandelier by dinner time. And this, right here, is the moment the whole night turned. Because she looked up at me, and every bit of color went out of her face. No, she said. No. What? No, he can't. Why not? She looked at Josie. Josie was picking the crust off her sandwich and lining the pieces up on the plate, careful, like a little construction crew. Delaney lowered her voice until I had to lean in. Because if he finds me, she said, he takes her. The refrigerator hummed. Takes her, I repeated. He filed. 8 weeks ago. Her hands were flat on my table and they were shaking. He's petitioning the court for permanent guardianship of my sister's daughter. And there's a review hearing. When? 9 days. 9 days. And what does the court want from you? I asked. To keep her. She laughed. That same wrecked little sound from the fence. 2 things, she said. Verified stable housing. Verified income. She spread her empty hands over my kitchen table. That's the whole list, Owen. That's it. 2 lines on a form. And I have been sleeping in a Chevy. I sat down. I had to. Across the table, Josie finished her crusts. Then she picked up her dinosaur, slid off the chair, walked over to the window above my sink, and set him on the sill. Standing up, facing the door, Delaney wiped her face fast with the back of her wrist. That's Gary, she said. He watches the door. She won't sleep unless he's watching the door. I looked at that battered green plastic dinosaur standing guard on my windowsill, and in 20 years of building things, I have never wanted to build something so badly in my life. That was the first night. One night. That's what I said. That's what I meant. I lay in my bed at 11 o'clock listening to my ex-wife breathe in the back room through a wall I put up myself, and I told myself, in the morning she goes to Bristow, and I get my quiet back. And this was just a strange hot Tuesday that happened to me. I almost believed it. But at 3 in the morning, I heard a cabinet close in my kitchen. I came down the hall barefoot, and she was standing in the dark in one of my old work shirts, moving things. Cans out of one cupboard into another. Coffee out of the high shelf where I'd been keeping it for 3 years. Down into the cabinet beside the stove, where it used to live, where she'd kept it. She heard me and froze with the bag in her hand like I'd caught her stealing again. "I can't sleep," she said. "Sorry, I'll put it back." "Leave it." "Owen, leave it," I said. "It's fine." And I went back down that hall and stood in the dark with my hand flat against the wall until my chest stopped hurting. Because here's what nobody tells you about the person who left. You spend 3 years building a case against them. You get very good at it. You've got exhibits, you've got the parking lot, and the Buick, and the man in the suit, and every single person in this town who looked at you with that soft, sorry face at the hardware store. And then she moves your coffee back to where it belongs, at 3 in the morning, and the whole case falls down like a bad wall. One night, I told myself. But the next morning, I called Bristow County myself, because I wanted to hear it. And a very kind woman told me the last bed had gone at 7:04 a.m., to a mother with 3 children and a broken wrist. And when I hung up the phone and turned around, Delaney was standing there in my kitchen with her duffel bag already packed and her chin up, ready to walk out my door with a 6-year-old and $41. That's when I heard myself say a thing I had promised myself I would never say to that woman again. Stay. I didn't know yet what it would cost me. I didn't know that in 6 days I'd open my father's old filing cabinet looking for a church contract and find a piece of paper that would tell me the real reason my wife walked out of my life. I didn't know that the man who saved my business the winter I nearly lost it, the mystery investor I'd been thanking God for 3 years, had a name, and that I already knew it. Stay. 1 word. 4 letters. I'd spent 3 years building a wall out of that woman's silence, and I knocked a hole in it myself before I'd even had coffee. She didn't move, just stood there in my kitchen with that soft-cornered duffel bag hanging off her shoulder like she'd forgotten she was holding it. "Owen, I can't." "You can't what? Walk to Bristow? Because that's 18 miles and it's already 84 degrees out there. I can't be in your house." "Why not?" "Because you'll be good to me," she said, and her voice went to pieces on the word good. "And I don't have anything to pay that back with." I looked at her a long moment. "Nobody asked you to pay anything back." Behind her, at my kitchen table, Josie had gone completely still, with a spoon halfway to her mouth, watching. 6 years old and already an expert in reading the weather in a room. The way kids get when the weather has been bad for a while. I saw Delaney see it too. She set the bag down. "Until the hearing," she said. 9 days. Then we're gone, and you never have to. Sit down and eat," I said. "The eggs are getting cold." That's how one night turned into the first week of the rest of my life. The first thing I learned about Josie was that she didn't talk. Not shy quiet. Not stranger quiet. She'd been in my house 2 days, and she hadn't made a single sound with words in it. She made other sounds. She hummed sometimes, 2 notes, over and over, when she was drawing. She laughed once at a squirrel that fell out of my oak tree, and she clapped both hands over her own mouth like she'd broken something. But no words. Delaney told me the doctor at the county clinic had a name for it. Said it started 3 weeks after Shelby's funeral. Said it wasn't stubbornness and it wasn't damage. It was a little kid's body deciding that talking was too dangerous, and locking the door until the world proved otherwise. "How long does it last?" I asked. "Until she feels safe," Delaney said. "That's the whole treatment plan, Owen. That's it. There's no pill. She has to feel safe." And she looked around my kitchen when she said it, and neither of us said the next part out loud. The second thing I learned about Josie was Gary. Every single night, that green plastic dinosaur had to stand on the windowsill of whatever room she was sleeping in, facing the door. If he fell over, she woke up. If he was on his side, she wouldn't lie down. Third night, I came in from the shop and found her in the back room, up on her toes, stretching for that sill. It was too high. She'd been dragging my footstool over every night, and I hadn't known. She got Gary up there. He slid. She caught him. She set him again, adjusted him a 1/4 inch. checked the angle against the door. Then she stood back and looked at him like a soldier inspecting a post. I went out to my shop. I had a church renovation bid due Friday, $11,000 of work I badly needed, and I sat down at my bench and cut a piece of white oak instead. Took me 20 minutes. Little shelf, no bigger than my hand. Rounded the edges so nothing could scratch a kid. Sanded it to 220 grit, which is finer than anybody needs for a shelf, and I did it anyway. 2 coats of finish. Screwed it into the stud beside the window in the back room, low enough that a 6-year-old could reach it without a stool. Then I left. Didn't tell them. Didn't stand around waiting to be thanked. I was on my back under the truck an hour later when a shadow came across my legs. I slid out. Josie was standing at the mouth of my garage in her light-up sneakers, holding Gary against her chest with both arms. She looked at me. I looked at her. She lifted one hand, palm out, and gave me a tiny wave. Then she turned around and ran. That was it. That was the whole thing. And I sat there on the concrete floor of my own garage with a wrench in my hand, and had to put my head down for a second. Delaney was in my kitchen when I came in. She'd been crying and hadn't bothered to hide it. That shelf, she said. It's scrap oak. Owen. It was 20 minutes. She checked it 4 times, Delaney said. She keeps going back to make sure it's still there. I got a glass down from the cabinet. Filled it. Didn't drink it. She's had a lot of things stop being there, I said. Yeah. So it's a good shelf. It's screwed into a stud. It's not going anywhere. And Delaney said, very quietly, neither is she, if I can help it. Now I have to tell you about Marin. Marin Todd runs the flower shop on Bell Street. 8 months we'd been together. She had a laugh you could hear across a parking lot, and she remembered the names of everybody's kids, and she was, I want to be honest here, a genuinely good woman who had done nothing wrong in her entire life. I drove over there the second night and told her the truth, standing in her back room among the buckets, doing it badly. She listened all the way through, without one interruption. Then she said, "Can I ask you one thing?" "Yeah." "When you saw her on that fence." Marin folded her arms. "Before you knew about the little girl. Before the shelter. Before any of the sad parts. Just her, up on your fence." She waited. "What did you feel?" And I opened my mouth. And I didn't have anything. 3-4 seconds. That's all it was. 4 seconds of a man standing in a flower shop unable to lie fast enough. Marin nodded slowly. "Yeah," she said. "Marin? Don't." She put her hand up, and she was smiling. And there were tears standing in her eyes, and she was still smiling. Which is the part I'll remember when I'm 80. Don't do the speech, Owen. I've been in this town my whole life. I knew what I was standing next to. That's not fair to you. No, it's not, she agreed. But it's not cruel either. There's a difference, and I've had both. And I'll take this one. She picked up a bucket of stems and moved it 2 feet for no reason at all. 8 months I've watched you, she said. You never once said her name. Not one time. You know how much work that is? To go 8 whole months and never say a name? I didn't answer. That's not a man who's over something, Marin said. That's a man holding a door shut. She walked me to the front. At the door she stopped. That little girl, she said. Does she have a bed? She does now. Good. Marin nodded once. Then go home. And that was the last conversation. She's the one who ended it. And she did it standing up. And if there's a hero in this story who doesn't get enough screen time, it's Marin Todd. The week went strange and warm and quick. Delaney got up at 5 every morning because she couldn't help it. She scrubbed the grout in my bathroom with a toothbrush. She found the crack in the window frame over the sink and caulked it herself with a tube she found in my shop, and did it better than I would have. She reorganized my whole kitchen at 3 in the morning, and I let her. 4th day. I came in the back door and heard something I hadn't heard in that house in 3 years. Music, the radio on the counter, and a woman singing along badly to it. Off-key, wrong words, exactly the way she always had. I stood in my own mudroom with my boots half off, and I couldn't go in. I just stood there and listened to my house sound like my house. Dot Feeney came over Thursday with a casserole, because Dot Feeney is 74 years old, and casserole is how she conducts an investigation. She sat at my table. She looked at Josie coloring. She looked at Delaney washing dishes at my sink. Well, Dot said. I always did say, that girl left for a reason. And it wasn't another man. I nearly choked. You never said that. I thought it very loudly. Then she leaned in, and her voice dropped, and it wasn't a nosy old woman's voice anymore. It was something older and harder than that. Delaney Croft, she said. You could have just told him, sweetheart. The water kept running. Delaney didn't turn around. And then he loses the shop, she said, to the window. And his daddy's name comes off that sign. And he hates me anyway, Miss Dot. He just hates me for a different reason. And I don't even get to be the one who saved it. Dot Feeney sat back in her chair. She looked at me across the table with an expression I did not understand yet, and would understand completely in about 72 hours. She said. That's all. Just that. The trouble started Friday, and it started polite. That's how it always starts in a town like this. Nobody yells, nobody threatens. A man just shows up with his hands in his pockets and a smile on. Roy Ketchum came to my shop at 11 in the morning. Roy manages property for Gil Croft, and he's managed it for 20 years, and he has never once in his life said a direct sentence. Owen, hot enough. Roy? He walked my shop floor, ran a thumb along a length of poplar, whistled at the joinery on a cabinet door I'd hung. Your daddy taught you right, he said. He did. Shame about the church job. I stopped sanding. What about the church job? Roy looked genuinely apologetic, which was the sickening part. He wasn't enjoying it. Board met last night, he said. Went a different direction. I'd imagine you'll get a letter. $11,000. 6 weeks of work. Gone in a meeting I wasn't in. Gil Croft sits on that board, I said. Gil sits on a lot of boards. I set the sander down. Say what you came to say, Roy. And Roy Ketchum sighed. And for 1 second I saw a tired 60-year-old man who hated his job. He knows she's at your place, he said. He's known since Wednesday. And he wanted me to tell you that he's got no quarrel with you, Owen. Never has. He's just asking you not to get in the middle of a family matter. There's a 6-year-old asleep in my back room. I know it. He's trying to take her. He's trying to raise her, Roy said. In a house with air conditioning and a college fund, instead of the back seat of a Chevy. That's how he'd put it. And Owen, a judge is going to hear it that way too. He put his hat back on. At the door he stopped, and he said the thing he'd actually come to say. You want my honest opinion? Get out of the way. Nobody in this county has ever gotten in the middle of Gil Croft and come out the other side with what they walked in holding. The screen door banged, and I stood in my father's shop and thought about the winter I nearly lost it. You have to understand, I'd forgotten. That's the truth. 3 years ago I was 11 days from the bank taking this building. Default notices in a drawer I kept locked. And then one morning, out of nowhere, the whole thing got quiet. The bank restructured. That's what I was told. Some line about portfolio adjustment. My payments dropped, the letters stopped, and I was so relieved I cried in my truck in the Tractor Supply parking lot like a kid. I'd spent 3 years thanking God for it. 3 years. Sunday, I went looking for the old church bid to see if I could underbid whoever they'd hired. My father's filing cabinet. Bottom drawer. Green folders. All his handwriting. 40 years of a man's life in ballpoint. And behind the church folder, filed where it didn't belong, was a manila envelope with no writing on it at all. Notice of assignment of note. 2 pages. Bank letterhead. Dated 3 years ago in February. The kind of paper they mail you and you throw away because you don't know what it means. It meant the bank hadn't restructured anything. The bank had sold my debt. Every dollar I owed on Marsh & Son, the building, the land, my father's name on the sign, had been bought by a limited liability company out of a P.O. box in Bristow. I sat down on the floor of my own shop. It took me 4 hours and a state business registry and a phone call to a clerk who owed me a favor. The LLC had a registered agent. The registered agent was an attorney named Paul Ansbro. Paul Ansbro has one client in this county, and everybody knows it. And his car is a Buick. A Buick. The same Buick my wife got into in a Kroger parking lot 3 years ago, in front of half this town, on the day she signed the papers. I don't remember driving home. I remember the kitchen. I remember Josie was in the bath, because I could hear the water. I remember putting those 2 pages down on my table, and Delaney turning around from the stove with a dish towel in her hands. She looked at the paper, and she didn't ask what it was. That's how I knew. How long? I said. Owen, how long has your father owned my building? She put the dish towel down very carefully, like it was made of glass. 3 years and 5 months, she said. The clock over my stove ticked. Say it all, I said. Right now. Every bit of it. So she did. Her father came to her in the January I was drowning. He'd known about the default before I did. He'd known for months, because Gil Croft knows everything that happens with money in this county before the people it's happening to. He'd already bought the note. It was done. He was holding it in a drawer, and he made her one offer. He said he'd never call it, Delaney said. Never. Not one payment late, not one letter, for as long as he lived. You'd keep the shop. You'd keep the sign. You'd never even know it happened. For what? For me. Her voice went flat, the way people talk about a thing they've said to themselves 10,000 times. End it clean, no explanation, not one word to you about why, because the second you knew, he'd call the note and take the building. That was the condition. Not a threat, Owen. He doesn't threaten. He just told me the arithmetic and let me do the math myself. And you were supposed to come work for him. Bookkeeping, his properties. She laughed. Terrible. For as long as he wanted me. Which was always going to be forever. And Ansbro's Buick. I signed the papers in his passenger seat, she said. That's the man this whole town thinks I left you for. He's 61, and he has a pacemaker, and he did not say one word to me the entire ride. I sat there. You tried to tell me, I said. It wasn't a question. Something was surfacing. Cold. From 3 years down. She closed her eyes. Once, she said. And I remembered it. I remembered it exactly. Standing in that kitchen. Her at the door with her purse still on her shoulder, saying, Owen, I need to tell you something about my father. And me, so lit up with relief I couldn't hear a word, talking right over the top of her about how the bank had come through, how we were saved, how I'd already ordered the lumber for the Hensley job. She'd stood there, and she'd watched my face, and she'd swallowed it. You were so happy, she said. You hadn't been happy in 4 months. And I thought, if I say it now, I take that away from him, and the shop, both at once. I put both hands flat on the table. Why didn't you fight him? It came out louder than I meant. Why didn't you come to me and say, Owen, we've got a problem, let's lose the building together? Why did you get to decide? Because I could fix it, and you couldn't. That's not fixing it, Delaney. That's managing me. I was on my feet. That's what he does. That's exactly what your father has done to you your entire life. He arranges things and tells you after. He never yelled at you once, and he still owns every room you've ever stood in. And the day it counted, you did the exact same thing to me. It landed like a slap. Because it was true. I watched it go into her, and I watched her have nowhere to put it. I know, she whispered. You decided I couldn't survive losing a building. My throat closed. You decided that. You didn't even give me the chance to fail with you. That's all I ever wanted, Delaney. Not the shop. Not the sign. I wanted to be somebody you could stand next to on a bad day. She was crying with no sound at all. And then Shelby died, I said. And you still didn't come. I tried. What? 14 months ago I tried to walk away from him. She looked up, and her face was ruined. And she said, so he filed for Josie. The room tilted. He switched it, she said. The building stopped working on me, so he found something that would. Stay and work for me, or I take her. That's all this is, Owen. That's what these 3 years have been. He just keeps finding new things to hold. I couldn't be in that house. I went out the back door and I drove to my shop, and I slept on the cot in the office like a man in a war, and I lay there in the dark and hated everybody, including me, especially me, because underneath all of it there was a thing I couldn't look at yet, a small, filthy little thing at the bottom of my chest. For 3 years, it had been easier believing she was cruel. Cruel meant it wasn't my fault. Cruel meant a man didn't have to ask himself why his wife couldn't tell him he was going under. I got back to the house at 8 in the morning. The kitchen was clean, the dishes were done, the blue bowl was centered on the counter. The back room was empty. Bed made, corners tucked. The duffel bag was gone. There was a note on the table in her handwriting. 5 words, "You've paid enough for me." And I stood in that quiet house, and I turned around slowly, and I looked at the little white oak shelf I'd screwed into the stud beside the window. Gary was still standing on it, facing the door. She'd left him behind on purpose. A 6-year-old's way of saying a thing she couldn't say with her mouth. Hold our place. I had 7 days until that hearing. And I had just let them walk out of my house. I have never driven 18 miles so slowly in my life. That's what fear does. It makes you careful. It makes you check your mirrors like a man who's already decided he's going to be turned away and wants to make the turning around look dignified. Bristow County Family Services sits behind a laundromat on a street with no trees on it. Cinder block painted the color of oatmeal. A window unit hanging out of the second floor, dripping onto the sidewalk in a slow, patient way, like it had been dripping there since 1988. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes. I had Gary in my jacket pocket. I could feel his tail through the fabric. Then I got out and walked in, and a woman behind bulletproof glass looked at me the way you look at a man who might be the reason somebody's in there. I'm looking for Delaney Croft. Are you family? And I stood there. Because what do you say? Ex-husband. That's the true answer. That's the word on the paperwork. Ex-husband, 3 years, no contact, showed up out of nowhere. I'm the one she came to, I said. The woman looked at me for a long moment. Then she buzzed the door. The day room smelled like industrial floor cleaner and somebody's microwave lunch. There was a television bolted to the wall up near the ceiling, playing a cooking show with the sound off. 4 rows of plastic chairs, a rack of donated coats in July. And in the corner, on the floor, my ex-wife was sitting cross-legged with her back against a cinder block wall. Josie was in her lap, both arms around Delaney's neck. Not crying, not moving, just holding on. The way kids hold on when they've figured out that holding on is the only job they've got. Delaney saw me. Her whole face came apart in half a second and then locked shut again. Hard, like a door in wind. No, she said. Delaney. No, Owen, go home. She was already getting up, shifting Josie onto her hip. You don't get to do this. You don't come here. Not here. I drove 18 miles. I don't care if you drove 1,800. Well, that's a shame, I said, because I'm going to say it either way. And that's when Josie lifted her head off her mother's shoulder. She saw my face, and her eyes went straight down to my hands, checking, and then to my pocket, where a green plastic tail was sticking out. She made a sound, not a word, a sound. A small, high, cracked open sound, like a bird hitting a window. And she reached. I put Gary in her hands, and she pulled him into her chest with both arms and pressed her forehead down onto the top of his head, and Delaney had to turn her face into the wall. You forgot your guard, I said. Owen, he's been standing on that shelf for 2 days facing an empty room, and I couldn't take it anymore. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, furious, embarrassed, still holding a child on her hip. Say it and go, she said. So I said it. I've got a house with 3 bedrooms, I said. A business in my own name, whatever's left of it. And 7 days. Her chin came up. Marry me again, I said. Do it Monday at the courthouse. 2 signatures and a witness. Then walk into that hearing with a husband, an address, and a man with a shop who'll swear to every bit of it. Let's go take that little girl off your father's list. The cooking show flickered on the wall, and Delaney Croft looked at me, the man she'd hung off a fence to beg for one night, and she said, no. I actually laughed. It came out of me sideways. No, no. Delaney, I'm handing you the list. Housing. Income. It's 2 lines on a form, and I'm both of them. That's exactly why not. Her voice cracked across that day room, and 2 women by the coat rack looked over. Do you hear yourself? You're a solution. You're a fix. You are standing there offering to be a line on a form. I'm offering to be your husband. You're offering to be my paperwork. She was crying and furious and beautiful, and I'd never wanted anything so badly in my life. Owen, I did this. I did this exact thing to you. I let a piece of paper decide what our marriage was worth. My father handed me a deal, and I signed it. And it cost us 3 years. She shifted Josie higher on her hip. So no, she said. You don't get me back because a judge needs a mailing address. If I ever stand next to you again, it's going to be because I chose it in daylight, with nothing on the line, or it doesn't count. I stood there in a county day room and I understood, maybe for the first time in my whole life, that I had married somebody with more spine than me. Fine. I said. Fine, fine. I picked up her duffel bag off the floor. Then we do it the hard way. Owen, you want housing that isn't a favor? I'll put your name on a lease, and you'll pay me rent out of your own pocket. And it'll be a real document, with a real number on it. You want income that isn't charity? Then you're going to have to go get a job like everybody else, and I'm not giving you one. I started walking. Where are you going? She said. To the truck, I said. It's 100 degrees, and there's a kid on your hip. You can be proud in the air conditioning. We did it in 6 days. I want to be honest about how it happened, because it wasn't magic, and it wasn't a speech. Monday, I drove to the county courthouse and got a standard residential lease off the clerk's website, printed at the library for 11 cents a page. Delaney's name, my address. $400 a month, which was low, and she fought me for 20 minutes about that until I told her the number was low because the back room has no closet. Which was true. She signed it in ballpoint at my kitchen table with her hand shaking. First document with her own name on it in 3 years that her father hadn't drafted. That's it? She said, looking at it. That's it. That's a home. That's what one looks like on paper. Tuesday was Dot Feeney. I hadn't asked her. I want that on the record. I was pulling into my driveway and Dot was standing at the property line in a housecoat at 7 in the morning, like she'd been posted there. Send that girl over, she said. Dot. Owen Marsh. I own 6 rental units on Poplar and Chase. I am 74 years old. I have not balanced a book since Reagan, and 2 of my tenants have not paid me since spring, because they know I'll forget. She pointed a finger at my chest. I need a bookkeeper. She was a bookkeeper. Send her over. She'll say it's charity. Then don't tell her it's charity, Dot said. Tell her it's a mess, because it is. Delaney went over at 9. She came back at 4 with 3 shoeboxes of receipts and a look on her face I hadn't seen in years. That sharp, narrow, I am going to fix this look. And she sat at my table until midnight, sorting paper into piles. Wednesday, Dot put her on the books. Real employment. W4. Tax withholding, a start date. 2 lines on a form. Thursday is when it got loud. I'd like to tell you I planned it. I didn't. I went to the church board meeting to ask them, one time, straight, why an $11,000 contract that had been mine for 6 weeks went to a company out of Bristow with no local references. 12 people in folding chairs in a fellowship hall that smells like coffee and hymnals. I've known most of them my whole life. Pastor Dean baptized me, and Gil Croft was sitting in the second row with his hands folded. They gave me the answer you'd expect. Different direction. Competitive process. Nothing personal, Owen. And I looked at that room. All those good people I'd grown up with, looking at their shoes, and something in me just quit being quiet. 3 years ago, I said, my shop went under. The room went still. 11 days from foreclosure. My daddy's name on that sign. 40 years of it. About to come down. And then one morning the bank restructured and I thought God had reached down and touched me on the head. I put the 2 pages on the table. Notice of assignment of note. The bank didn't restructure anything. The bank sold my debt, and the man in this room in the second row bought it. Nobody moved. He never told me. He told my wife, and he made her one offer. Divorce me, tell me nothing, come work for him, and he'd never call the note. And the day she signed those papers in the Kroger parking lot, in front of half of you, and every one of you decided you knew what kind of woman she was. My voice went. I got it back. She was signing away 3 years of her life so my father's name could stay on a building. Somebody's chair creaked. And now Shelby Croft is dead, I said. And there's a 6-year-old girl who don't talk, and he's petitioning this county for custody of her. Same man, same drawer. He just keeps finding new things to hold. I looked at Gil Croft. He hadn't moved once. He didn't look angry. That's the part that told you everything. He looked inconvenienced. The way you look when it rains on a Saturday. That's what I came to say, I said. Do what you want with the contract. I walked out. I got to my truck before my hands started shaking so bad I couldn't get the key in. Here's what I didn't know. Small towns are quiet. They are so quiet. Everybody sees everything, and nobody says a word, and you can live your whole life inside that quiet, and think it's peace. But quiet isn't peace. Quiet is just what people do when nobody's gone first. By Friday morning, it was everywhere. Not gossip. This was different. Nobody was whispering. Wanda at the diner asked me flat out at the register, with 6 people standing behind me. Pastor Dean called my shop. 2 men I'd framed houses with in my 20s came by just to stand there and say, "That ain't right, Owen," and then not know what else to do with their hands. And Dot Feeney drove to First Regional Bank of Marion County on Friday at 10 a.m. and moved every dollar she had. Then she told them why. Loud. In the lobby. 74 years old, in a housecoat, in a bank. 2 other people did it Monday. A third called the loan officer to ask, plainly, whether the bank made a habit of selling a man's note to a man's father-in-law without a phone call first. Tuesday afternoon, First Regional called me. A vice president I'd never spoken to in my life offered to refinance the note on Marsh & Son out from under the LLC that held it. Standard rate, standard terms. And when I asked him why, he was quiet for a second and then said, "Because I've had a very uncomfortable week, Mr. Marsh, and I'd like it to stop." Wednesday at 4:15 in the afternoon, I signed papers in an office on Main Street and bought back my own building. Gilcroft's leverage, the thing he'd held over that woman's head for 3 years, the drawer he kept our whole marriage in, went in a shredder. The hearing was Thursday, 9 o'clock, Bristow County Courthouse. Delaney wore a gray dress she'd bought at the Goodwill on Chase for $6 and pressed on my kitchen table with a towel under it. She'd been up since 4. She'd thrown up twice. She had a folder. In it, a signed lease. 2 pay stubs from D. Feeney Properties. A letter from the clinic about Josie's speech therapy schedule. A note from Pastor Dean, and a doctor's appointment card for a dentist in September, because a caseworker had once told her that scheduling a future is evidence you believe in one. That's what 3 years and a marriage came down to. A green folder with 6 pieces of paper in it. We got there at 8:20. Paul Ansbro was in the hallway, Buick keys in his hand, 61 years old, with a pacemaker and a bad summer suit. He stood up when he saw us. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "It's Croft," Delaney said. "It's whatever you say it is." He handed her a single sheet of paper. "My client is withdrawing the petition." The hallway went sideways. Delaney took the paper. She read it 3 times. Her hands were shaking so hard the paper made noise. "Why?" she said. Ansbro glanced down the hall. "Because a contested hearing means testimony," he said. "And testimony means your account of the terms under which you signed your divorce, entered into a public record in a county where my client owns 11 commercial properties and sits on 4 boards." He picked up his briefcase. "It's arithmetic," he said. "It always was. He's just on the other side of it now." He walked to the elevator, and then, at the doors, he did something I did not expect. He turned around. "For what it's worth," Paul Ansbro said, "I drove you home that day. I've thought about it for 3 years." The doors closed. Gil Croft was standing at the end of the hall by the window. Delaney went to him. I stayed where I was, because that one wasn't mine. I couldn't hear all of it. I heard some. He told her she'd be back inside a year. He said it kindly. That's the thing about that man. He never once raised his voice at his daughter in his life, and he'd still spent 35 years running her like a set of books. And she said, "You want to know the worst thing you ever did to me?" He waited. "You made me think being loved and being owned were the same shape," she said. "It took me until I was 35 years old to learn they're not." Then she said, "Shelby knew. That's why she moved to Ohio at 19 and never came back for Christmas." "She knew at 19, Daddy, and you didn't come to her funeral until the 2nd day." And she walked away from him. He stood at that window a long time, long after we'd gone in. That's the last I ever saw of Gil Croft. The hearing took 11 minutes, uncontested. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, went through the folder page by page. Lease, pay stubs, clinic letter. She asked 3 questions, and Delaney answered all 3, without her voice breaking, which she later told me was the hardest thing she has ever done. Then the judge took her glasses off and looked down at the little girl sitting in the 2nd chair with a plastic dinosaur in her lap. "Josie," she said, "I'm going to ask you a question, and there's no wrong answer, and nobody in this room is going to be upset with whatever you say. Where would you like to live?" The clock on the wall ticked. Delaney had her hands folded so tight her knuckles were white. And Josie Croft, who hadn't spoken a full sentence since 3 weeks after her mother's funeral, looked up at the judge and said out loud, in front of everybody, "Where Gary's shelf is." 4 words. "I have built 200 houses. I have hung doors and framed roofs and laid floors that will outlive me by 100 years. 20 minutes of scrap oak. That's what I made. 20 minutes and 2 screws." The judge put her glasses back on, very quickly, and looked down at her papers for a second longer than she needed to. "Permanent guardianship is granted," she said. 6 weeks later, I replaced every picket on that back fence. Every single one but one. The soft one. Third from the gate post. The one I'd been standing on a ladder to fix on the hottest Tuesday of the year when I heard the wood groan behind me. Josie asked about it. She asks about everything now. She has 3 years of words saved up and she is spending them all at once, all day, on everybody, and I would not trade one syllable of it. "Why's that one all gross?" "Because that's the one that let your mama in," I said. She thought about that. "That's dumb," she said. "It's gonna break." "Probably. Then she can't get back over." "She's got a key now, Bug." I asked Delaney in that backyard in October. "No ring. The ring came later, because I'm a carpenter and carpenters are broke in the fall. Just me with wood shavings on my boots and her barefoot in the grass, and she said yes before I got to the end of it. She said yes so fast, I had to make her let me finish. The wedding was 40 folding chairs from the church basement. Dot Feeney cried into a casserole dish for reasons she refused to explain and denied afterward under direct questioning. Marin Todd did the flowers, did them beautifully, stayed for the toast, hugged Delaney at the door, and left early. And everybody in that yard understood exactly what it cost her, and nobody said a word about it. And that is the one kind of small-town quiet I'll defend to my dying day. Josie carried the rings in a shoebox, because she wanted Gary to carry them, and that was the compromise we reached after lengthy negotiation. And late that evening, when everybody was gone, and the chairs were stacked, and the lights were still strung across the yard, my wife stood barefoot in the grass in her dress and looked at that one rotten picket standing in a brand new fence. "You could have fixed that," she said. "I know. Why didn't you?" And I said, "I like knowing where the gap is. We go to counseling on Thursdays. Have for a year. A woman in Bristow, with a plant she keeps forgetting to water. And I hate it. I have hated every single hour of it. And I have not missed one. Because here's the truth I had to learn at 38 years old. Our marriage didn't die because she stopped loving me. It didn't die because of another man, or her father's money, or a note in a drawer. It died because I couldn't stand to be seen failing. So I hid the letters. And it died because she was raised by a man who taught her that love means arranging things behind people's backs for their own good. So she signed the papers. 2 people trying so hard to spare each other that we spared each other right out of a life. 3 years I thought she climbed out of my life. Turns out she just took the long way back over. So let me ask you something before you go. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a person you love, and there's one hard thing you haven't told them. A number, a diagnosis, a letter in a drawer, and you've told yourself you're staying quiet to protect them. But be honest with yourself for 1 second. Are you really protecting them? Or are you protecting the version of you that they still believe in? Because that's what cost Owen and Delaney 3 years. Not a lie, not a betrayal, just 2 people who loved each other too much to be seen failing. Tell me in the comments, what's the thing you've never said out loud? And who are you really keeping it from?